Welcome, everybody. I'm Christian Berger, your host for the next hour on IT trends in construction. We will be starting at promptly 1 minute after. I want to give people enough time to get in and get situated. So stand by and we'll be rolling momentarily. All right, welcome everybody. As I said, Christian Berger, President of Berger Consulting Group. I feel awkward introducing myself because I know a number of people on the call here. Welcome back, everybody. For those of you that don't know, I have been in the industry for, I'd like to say 30 plus years now, because it gets a bit uh, sad to think about when I look at the real numbers, but 30 plus years in the industry. Berger Consulting's been around for 27 of those years. I started my career at FMI. I've done systems and transformation work for contractors all over the U.S. and up in Canada, and it's given me an amazing window into what's going on in our industry, and I'm able to keep a good finger on the pulse um, uh, through the engagements we do with small, mid-size, and larger clients, mostly all commercial, industrial, institutional construction, not so much on the residential. I also teach a course at Northwestern on innovation in construction for a master's program there. I come to you from Chicago and want to thank you for attending. This is the second part in a two-part series on IT trends. We did the first part in either late December, early January, that focused on three critical trends uh, in the industry. Back then, one was ERP, um, a governance framework for making decisions and managing change. And then the last was restructuring of IT, which I'll touch a bit on that when we get to the end today. We do have a lot of material to cover. I'm probably going to be speaking with you fairly brisk pace. We do have time at the end for questions. If you have questions, please put them in the monitor from my organization will be monitoring that and sharing those with me as we get to the Q&A period. So with that, today we're going to speak about enterprise architecture, which some of you are familiar with. Some of you are actually working with enterprise architecture, but may not be thinking of it in those terms. We're going to talk and look at heavy equipment, telematics, various point solutions and what's happening there, process improvement and how that transformation comes about, safety and quality, integrated procurement, and AI adoption and experimentation. You couldn't do a talk in construction without addressing AI, but that actually probably deserves a topic unto itself. So, with that, let's get started. So, I wanted to begin this talk with a little bit of a look at the broader trends. Certainly, one of the biggest impacts that we are seeing as an industry is the new administration, the emphasis on the tariffs and the choking of the supply chain. There's certainly a lot of chatter out there about how that's going to affect material pricing and availability. In fact, I expect that many contractors had to take a quick look at their contracts and to see if they had escalation provisions and around pricing, and also what kind of material was being required and where it was coming from. I mean, when you think about what was threatened early on, maybe a month ago or 6 weeks ago, with 135% tariffs on items from China and how much building supply comes from there, we were having the same discussion, though with lower values, with Canada, where a lot of lumber comes from. It's just going to be a very tricky place to navigate. So I think that's a preoccupation that we all have at the moment. Also, fairly significant change in regulation. Probably we're going to see some weakening, my estimation, some weakening with OSHA and EPA, which will affect things. There will probably be fast tracking of permitting in certain situations, which could be beneficial. There's also, with all this onshoring or attempt at onshoring, the construction industry is probably fairly bullish in terms of um, all the work that's coming. Can we get it all done with our labor supply? That's another question. The labor supply was a problem. And that labor supply that was diminished or diminished in terms of capacity then actually is going to be more at risk because the threat of the um, uh, uh, sending away um, uh, undocumented immigrants who are a chunk of our workforce. So what we're taking a already fragile condition and making it worse potentially. So I think that's something we have to be mindful of as well. Certainly a lot of concentration on AI and what it can bring. I would say the hype there is at fever pitch. Contractors are experimenting, trying different things. There's no way that they have the condition today to utilize AI with their own data. It's not ready for that, in my estimation. I would say that using point solutions, though, that leverage AI technology and machine learning technology is certain large language models certainly a possibility. I think the pressure from your owner community, the owners to the general contractors to the specialty contractors, continues significantly. And having to prove the case that you have the technology available to meet their needs, keep the projects on schedule and on budget is not diminishing at all. And so I think that having a proper tech stack and good processes, good controls is certainly a expectation from owners today in order to get on bid lists and win contracts. The solution marketplace is continuing to evolve. I mean, every week I feel like I'm learning about a new startup, a new venture, or something that's offering some technology to the industry, and that's probably a good thing. It makes for a noisy marketplace. It can be confusing with all of these technologies coming out at one time, and which ones are going to survive. So I think that's been interesting. The other thing that's changed too is, 10, 15 years ago, we were an industry of mainly what you would call cottage industry, privately held, family run software companies that were um, meeting the needs of the industry. And in that time, almost everything has been bought up by Trimble, Autodesk, Procore, um, uh, Thoma Brava, and one other. And so most Oracle. So when you look at the technology providers now, you've got an awful lot of platforms that are in the hands of five publicly traded software companies. And then from there, you go immediately into the startups that are there. So that condition has changed and means that vendor management is much more of a responsibility of the contracting organization than it used to be. It's just different. And the CMMC is requirements, the security requirements for anybody doing work with the federal government. That's a significant change as well. And we feel that even if you don't have CMMC requirements today, it wouldn't be a bad thing to get familiar with those requirements, try and meet those expectations, because by doing so, you really put yourself in conformance or in compliance with cyber insurance policies, for example. So we think that that's generally a good standard to monitor. Excuse me. Now, how is all of this technology going to be harmonized and made effective? So this brings us to enterprise architecture. So in days before, we had all these point solutions. You had an ERP platform, an HR platform, timekeeping, scheduling, estimating, uh, um, time, let's see, fabrication, payroll, time card solutions. You had all these different point solutions, CRM, and nothing really helping to pull all that data together and move it between systems. So if those of you remember that back in the old days, we had to do file downloads and then file uploads. It was kind of archaic and error prone. Today, the we have software that resides at the enterprise level and is really meant for handling data and content between all of these systems and giving you safe haven for your data and for your content. That's the ECM. So I want to spend a couple of minutes on these because really mid-size and larger, you have to be working with these kinds of solutions. These are industrial grade products and technologies that are meant to keep your enterprise healthy, safe, data accessible. Even if your timekeeping application changes or your CRM changes, the underlying stack stays the same, and you just have to unplug and replug something new. So middleware, we're seeing tremendous amount of deployment of Boomi, some MuleSoft. There's Jitterbit out there. There's other mediums for HH2 has one for Sage. Rivet is another one that's out there. But we think that you need a general purpose connector that allows you to connect not only to your ERP, but then to other applications that you may be using. And this is a very powerful platform. Some of you have these already in place, but a way of moving data from one solution to another. I've seen some very good examples of that with firms that have an ERP system in place and Procore, for example. And when they start a job in Procore, it populates in the ERP. And when they do a change order in a project management system, it updates job costs. So that kind of automated updating is really what you're looking for. And then the middleware platform actually will let you deploy something called master data management, where you begin to put your master file maintenance in the middleware. And so let's take a customer as an example, and we're going to decide that our ERP system is the golden record of that customer. So now the customer data is housed in middleware, and any system that needs customer data gets it from that table, if you will. So we think for data consistency and control, we think that's a good second step in that middleware journey. It's also a very scalable platform, would allow you to grow and change platforms. Um, Data and analytics, that is probably, arguably, the most important level of data of initiative to contractors today. I'm a proponent of AI, and I believe that it will have an impact. But I think that in terms of immediacy, if you're not getting good data in an analytics platform like Tableau or Power BI, you're a step behind. I was with a company not too long ago that was actually running all of their reporting into Excel and then emailing Excel reports around. Now that's an extreme example, but there's another organization that's using Crystal reports and just having people run Crystal. We've got to get out of that sort of mode of static one-dimensional reports and really create a platform that houses the data, controls the data, and significantly really maintains data standard. We've I've been in too many 16 job cost reports that they've developed and evolved over time, and they are They all look a little different. Sometimes their calculations are different, and it's not anything that is standardized, and that's a bit dangerous in my opinion. Not only that, but inefficient. So, um, development of the data warehouse with data marts as needed and then connected via middleware. Then you can start publishing dashboards. And I would say that a standard I would look at today is if a company is publishing dashboards to the user community, that would be a sign that you're starting to down this data journey. So you will ultimately probably standardize on something like Power BI or Tableau. Um, and then there's training involved and what have you. But that's the way people need to be accessing data today. I wanted to put this on up here. This is an exhibit we use for other presentations, other discussions, but this notion of what are the elements of a data strategy certainly have right now where it says you are here, you've got all these disparate, separate solutions, and that's where your data is housed. Um, the middleware solution then brings the data from those into the data warehouse, which can then publish data marts, and then you get to the analytics and publishing. Now, in addition to that, we really need to think about, and companies are doing this, the bigger ones anyway, are starting to think about external data sources, IoT level data sources, telematics, for example, building sensors, health and safety, where we're getting real-time feeds from other solutions, other systems, other websites even. And I'll give you an example of that in just a couple of minutes. Also, as you're deploying data warehouse, you need to be thinking about data quality. And there are technologies out there that work with Google BigQuery and Azure and other data warehouse platforms to kind of continually monitor data quality and flag you if if there's a problem so you can get the data cleaned up. I think we're all experienced from at this point with the impact of not having good quality in reports that are misleading or wrong, and a lot of frustration trying to clean it up. So automating that data quality is pretty important. And then I mentioned data ownership. I think that we've been an advocate for a while now of having process owners. So let's take procurement as an example. If somebody in the organization has responsibility for procurement as a process, all the way from bill of materials to paying the invoice, that process is under one individual or one team custodianship. And they're monitoring, they're looking at the tools, they're looking at efficiencies, controls, all of that's under the domain of one team. And then any changes that need to be made are also managed through that team. But really, the extension then is to data ownership, data governance. How do we manage all the data that's flowing through that individual process? Now, that would be a big organization that has the luxury of somebody that's in a data ownership standpoint. But even as a small organization, you can start to assign people and as on a part-time basis, not full-time, to monitor and track that level of data quality. There is a number of models out there around maturity. You'll see it on a number of different things, AI maturity and data maturity and systems maturity. And it's just a way to kind of try and get a establish a little bit of a protocol, not a protocol, but a baseline. Thank you. A baseline of where you're at the moment. So things tend to be start off very nascent, very immature, and maybe ad hoc. And then as you grow and mature, you get into a position where a little bit more reliable performance, not yet enterprise grade, but still better than nothing. And then we get to enterprise level kind of thinking and behavior and protocol, and then into where you can actually scale with that particular technology. So we feel that the construction industry is probably somewhere in, well, my guess would be more toward two than three, but in terms of data maturity. But it is a move that you have to make and should be making. Now, the last area in this enterprise journey is content management. Now, I've been informed by the smarter people in my team that it's now called information management, but that feels a bit vague in terms of what this really is about. So, some of you know that there are solutions out there that are meant to govern, to control all of your digital content. So, photographs, drawings, contracts, POs, time cards, employment documentation, all of these elements of content should be housed somewhere, not in file folders scattered hither and yon. And that's what we have too much. We've got people storing documents in email inboxes, in network drives, local drives, customer solutions like a Procore or Autodesk Build or a PM Web or whatever it is. So you've lost document sovereignty. Those of you that have legal counsel in your office, in your company, already aware of this problem. If you get hit with discovery notice and you can't produce, or it's very costly to produce, very, very problematic. In fact, one example that I kind of cringed at is I just saw the notice news about this. There's a skyscraper, 80 some stories in New York City, and it's only about 10 years old and it has like 12 or 1800 defects. And the homeowner association for this building is now suing the contractor and probably the city and everybody else um, around the defects of this building. And the discovery process was in the millions of documents and 9 months or something of time. Think about the legal cost in all of this. But it's not just legal, it's things like audits as well, owner audits, in tax, sales tax audits, any kind of situation where you have to find and deliver, produce documentation. Content management can be immensely helpful. And this technology has evolved greatly from early days. And I think that it's one that most contractors of size should be evaluating. And there are, I mean, we have clients that are in the $100 million range using this on a fairly consistent and good basis. Um, and I think that where I feel like, yes, cleaning up the content sprawl is a good idea. What concerns me more, though, is all of the content, and especially those of you that are um, putting your content in another company's platform. The risk there is pretty significant because at any point in time that can be turned off, and all of a sudden you've just lost all of that digital content. So um, consider that as part of enterprise architecture. Um, so, just a quick case study. We had a client that had a lot of disparate systems. They were growing rapidly, and they weren't connected very well, the systems. And there was a lot of duplicate handling of data where data was pulled out of one system and then put into another system. They actually went out and they evaluated middleware, ended up deciding on Boomi, and they used a third party Boomi resource to get started and start doing connections, but they also trained up somebody inside the organization to be that Boomi administrator who could then build new ones as they went. Very successful and very satisfied with that result. Okay, so here are some more direct and immediate kinds of trends, I would say. Um, Prefab. If there's a mechanical contractor on the phone on this presentation, likely you're doing some level of prefab. In fact, I know some of the mechanicals on the call, and you are. And this is a significant and growing resource for the company. Historically, the prefab shops were disconnected in a large part from the rest of the operation. So the only commonality was maybe a timesheet, maybe a PO, but the shop floor itself was managed in spreadsheets and dry erase boards. And I mean, it was kind of archaic. Some mechanical contractors were putting in shop standalone shop floor applications to handle shop floor production and productivity and material planning. But those require a fairly heavy integration to um, ERP. Now, here's an interesting trend. Um, the ERP solutions that we have depended on for so long don't handle fabrication. They handle construction, and they have good job cost, and they have purchasing. They have light inventory management. It's not until you get to the next level, and I'm going to mention some names, IFS and Dynamics in particular. Most companies on the call aren't going to be in the Oracle and SAP realm, maybe some, but generally, I mean, it's certainly manufacturing exists there too. That was where they started, and then they became acquainted with construction. The middle tier, this IFS and Dynamics, have strong construction capability and fabrication built in. So now you can have one solution that has one purchasing module that serves construction and um, manufacturing, and generally coordinates all the activity between shop and field. Pretty significant change in architecture. When you look at Coins and Vista and Sage 300, those don't do anything for the shop floor. Acumatica does have some of that if it's sufficient for the fabrication. I haven't really evaluated that directly, but maybe. But certainly, as that area grows in significance, I don't think we can ignore the impact that it's going to have from a systems standpoint. Also, shop floor typically means a higher level of QA/QC. A lot of shops are having to be ISO certified, and that brings with it a lot of compliance. So you have to have a QA solution available for that shop floor as well. There is quite a bit of dependence on point solutions now. I think that in years past, we had, and I'm going to say the term immature, not childlike, but just less mature departments. HR is an example, safety is an example, procurement, another one, equipment management, another one. So you had these departments that were less mature from a data information perspective, and they were just going along with whatever they were provided by IT or accounting or whatever. Today, those departments have all matured. I'm seeing way more professional caliber management in departments like legal, HR, equipment, safety, and their demands, they expect to have modern tools. So this proliferation of point solutions is not going to go away. It's only going to grow, which really causes greater demand for middleware and other solutions to keep them all, and really data governance as well. So um, uh, the point solution uh, evolution, I suppose, is something we got to pay attention to. Um, okay, so one of the areas I mentioned was equipment. I'm seeing tremendous uh, evolution of the equipment applications and tool management. Again, a lot of companies were reliant on their ERP system to have manage heavy equipment. So you would have an application like a Vista or CMIC or, well, let's just use those two. And they had equipment applications that did preventive maintenance, they did work orders, they charged jobs, they kept track of cost and revenue on the equipment. So that was the condition we came from. Today, I think I'm seeing for those that have heavy equipment moving out to solutions that take telematic data and aggregate. So most of the heavy equipment produced today has some level of telematics installed already. CAT, John Deere, Case, Komatsu, any of those. But there was no real good way to aggregate that data into a platform. And then solutions like Clue and Tenna came along, and there's maybe another one. Won't think of it right away. But anyway, they said, well, wait a minute, why don't we take all that telematic data and build an application around it? And they've done that. So now you've got let's say that a D8 has a fault, throws a fault code. Well, that system, Tenna, Clue, picks up that fault code and says, oh, that's this. We need to send somebody out, get a work order, send it to the field, to the mechanic or the foreman in the field. So that's good. And we're getting temperature, pressure, fuel consumption, all these metrics coming in. Um, but, and there's always a but we actually need to integrate some or all of that into our ERP, because in our ERP is typically where we have our inventory parts management, we have our purchasing for third-party repairs, we have our time card solution for payroll. So our job cost is there for charging jobs. So there is a level of integration required between these third-party equipment solutions and back to the ERP. Now, I mentioned a couple of things. The tool tracking. Some companies feel like they want to put everything in their equipment management solution, and I'm not a fan. I would say that what I like to see for tool tracking is tool tracking system. So, because I've got a lot of something, whether it's hard hats, ladders, come alongs, generators, whatever these small items are, I need to keep up with who has them. Did I get them back? Um, I don't have a lot of need to do preventive maintenance on these things. I don't have to do a lot of repair. Cost tracking isn't really such a thing. But I want a way to charge the jobs. So instead of charging the job based on each tool, what we tend to recommend is create a labor burden for tool tracking, for tool management, 2% of labor cost or $2.50 per labor hour, and just have that automatically charge the job for small tools. That money goes to the equipment division, which then buys their small tools out of that account. So the accounting for all the small tools is fairly simple and streamlined, and yet you've got the tracking mechanism for accountability in the uh, tool management system. I think you're going to, probably a little late if you haven't done it already, but buying critical repair parts. I think that with particularly for those of you that depend on equipment for production, like a heavy civil would, a highway builder, um, you better have a supply of your parts, because if you've got long lead items or items that are coming from somewhere else, given the threat to the supply chain, you can't be down for, hours or days if because you don't have access to parts. So getting it back into the parts business, which nobody wanted to do, may be a thing. Okay. Um, okay, another significant area of automation is in the procurement and AP function, or procure to pay, as it sometimes is called. So, you right now, most companies have a procurement application that's part of their ERP. So you can go in and type in a PO, match it to a receiver, and then it goes to AP and that whole process. And I wouldn't even say that process is great, because it works, but most contractors don't have it deployed well. Getting receivers in from the field is way more difficult than it should be, but it is. But now what's happened is companies have evolved, software developers have evolved I would call it a pre procurement function, which actually handles the RFQ and the vendor engagement. Think EDI from the old days. And so what you have are solutions like um, uh, Remarkable and Kojo and Coupa on the higher end that are really meant to be this whole procurement function, up to and including sometimes the PO and the receiving function. And then they hand off a payables transaction to the job. What this means is that contractors can actually have an app in the field that a foreman can use to just request or order parts from an Amazon shopping cart. I mean, simple as that. But it goes to the right vendor. The pricing's been agreed to. We have the a record of the purchase, so that when the invoice comes in, we can match it. So I think that for those of you that are mechanical, electrical specialty, that are buying a lot of goods, supplies for jobs, that's an process that I would say is pretty far along in I would say a lot of our clients are evaluating that sort of technology. The other part in here, and this won't be too exciting to everybody on the call, but is sales tax automation. You guys buy stuff for job sites all over the place and from vendors that are all over the place. Sometimes they have a sales tax certificate, sometimes they don't. Sometimes the job is non-taxable, sometimes it's taxable. Sometimes some material on the job is taxable and sometimes it's not. Sometimes you buy material and send it into the shop first, which is a different jurisdiction than the job site. So the sales tax calculation is complex. And there are solutions now that tie to Vertex or Avalara, which are two sales tax third-party supply vendors who do the sales tax automation, and they will produce or provide the correct sales tax calculation to the procurement or the payables system. So I am seeing more use of that solution for sales tax. And then the last one is really the P cards. I'm seeing more use of P cards, purchasing cards out in the field. These are credit cards that have pretty tight restrictions. So you're restricting not only who's able to buy, but from whom you can, what stores are legit and which ones aren't, and SKUs. We can even limit it to SKUs. So I can send a foreman out to the 7-Eleven to get water and gas, but he can't buy lottery tickets and cigarettes. So that level of control around procurement in the field. And the good thing about that is it speeds up the payables processing if all that coding has been done in advance. So now we're getting away from having $15.80 invoices come through payables, which are very costly to process. So a lot of change happening in this procurement area. Also, much to my surprise, not surprise, but pleasure, I suppose, is or satisfaction is safety and quality. So there's a lot of advancement happening in the safety and QA, and we're seeing more technology being deployed out there to inspect, to train, to monitor safety. And that's a good thing. And I think if there's data that an organization needs that's critical, it's that. Um, I'm afraid, well, I see reports from news, unfortunately, too regularly about accidents and death on job sites. And I mean, it's unfortunately part of our industry. We can do better, I know. But when I look at what's happening and why it's happening, I think to myself, why are we not using technology to help solve that? But part of the problem is culture. I've been in organizations that have a very strong safety culture, and it starts at the top, and there's safety incentive programs. There is lots of inspections, plenty of training, awareness. It's very forward, progressive. And then I've been in some organizations where it isn't, and it's disappointing to see. What I've liked about some of the solutions that I've seen is one example of that was a, uh, a point solution that monitored. It was a camera that was mounted, and it monitored the job site, and it could actually see and recognize problems. So if a guy didn't have a vest on or he didn't have a hard hat on, it could see it and throw a warning to a foreman or a project manager. If we don't have proper shoring in our trenches, it could see that and warn. So, and then you've got this, I just picked an example, but the hard hats that are now come with monitoring. So hard hat solutions like this not only detect, they keep up with where you are on the job site. So if you have to evacuate, we know we get everybody out, but it also keeps up with hazardous gases. So it can detect if there's methane or some other gas in the area, get people out. And if the hard hat moves from 6 feet above ground to ground level quickly, maybe there's a man down. So, and then you can even get into some of the biometric stuff where you're tracking temperature, blood pressure. And in today's environment outside in the summertime, that's kind of key. So I'm liking what I'm seeing there, and I feel like there's, well, I don't want to say no investment is enough, but certainly contractors can always be investing heavier there. Um, I would say that I'm seeing mid-sized companies deploying solutions like Safety Sight and HammerTech and iAuditor and ClickSafety. Um, but they're also deploying systems like Procore. And the feeling is, well, we already have Procore, we have it in the field, and people use it, so let's just use that also. I haven't looked at Procore Safety in a while, but I have looked at other solutions, and I would say that it feels like some of the other ones that I would call point solutions, more advanced, more capable. And then you've got, when you take it up a step, you get to solutions like Origami and Devonway, which are more of a platform, and you can do all kinds of inspections, safety, quality included. And that takes more development time and effort to implement, but it's one single platform for all of these field related functions. So I am seeing that direction as well. Payroll and HR is an interesting one. 15 years ago, I would say you couldn't even say the word third party payroll and without getting tossed out because everybody knew that no one handled construction payroll well except for the ERP systems that had payroll. Sage 300, CMIC, Coins, Penta, all of these systems. And and for a long time, we had separate HR platforms that were, think of Bamboo as an example. So that handled HR, but HR only. Well, a number of platforms looked into construction and said, wow, that's a huge opportunity. We should go in there. And so they brought their large scale HR platforms into construction. Think like Workday and there's some other ones, but something of that scale. Very advanced, very sophisticated self-service benefits administration. They had some of them had LMS. Well, then some of these platforms said, well, why don't we do payroll too? It makes sense. We're adjacent. Well, then they got into it and they realized our payroll is super complex, particularly with unions and uh, uh, Davis Bacon prevailing wage. And so then they were like, oof, that's a little hard. And then they had to retool a little bit. And there's more detail that I don't want to go into right now. But I think what we have today is a better market of available solutions for union and Davis Bacon prevailing wage contractors to do payroll outside and move the data in. Now, how that data, when that data is updated from time card and when the data goes back into job cost and all is certainly something that's been figured out, but has to be addressed in each case. Um, I would say if you're on a mature ERP platform that has a good payroll, staying put is perfectly fine. If you move to an ERP platform, and some of them are like this, that doesn't have a payroll, you're going to have to look at something to handle that. Okay, I want to watch my time a little bit here, maybe pick up the pace. Um, Contractors have become much more process centric, process oriented. They realize that new tools by themselves don't solve problems. You have to have it deployed, implemented, adopted inside the organization. And in order to do that, you really have to take a look at a process. Now, we've been doing this for a long time, so I kind of understand how this happens. But look at, as an example here, I put one up for procure to pay. So when you look at a bit of data, a light bulb, some silt fence, lumber, whatever it is, it starts all the way down here in estimating, gets moved into a bill of materials. Here's everything we need to buy on the job. Then I've got an RFQ process where I get quotes. There's a requisition function that says, here's what I need, generate a PO. It might tie to a submittal. I get a receipt or not. Then it goes to invoice and payment. Now, if you were to sit down and look at this in isolation and just look at PO and receiving or just payables, you might get one idea about how efficient the process is. When you get everybody, all the stakeholders in a room and you talk about this process, what happens is everybody's like, oh, I didn't know you did that. Oh, how come you didn't ask me for that? Or I didn't realize the process worked that way. And there are six handoffs, 4 to 6 handoffs of data in this particular process stream. Highly inefficient. So, what can we do to automate the entire process stream instead of just one application area? It's a paradigm shift that we have to make. Now, if you're doing this exercise without the aid of a consultant, then here are some symptoms to look for. If you are in a room listening to how you do things today with people that are intimately involved in the process, listen for things about spreadsheets. Spreadsheets is probably one of the primary symptoms of a system that's not doing its job if you're off on spreadsheets a lot. Third-party applications might be good, but also could mean that we lack integration. If there's a lot of rehandling of data, lack of communication, the field doesn't know when material is going to arrive on the job site. Accounts payable doesn't know when the item has been received in the field, for example. And then finally, any email workflow. If we're doing a lot of our workflow in these process areas via email, that's another symptom. So if you have a lot of those in your process streams, you know you have a process that needs attention and improvement, and not just a new piece of technology thrown at it. Now, quick little peek behind the curtain. When we do process evaluation, and you can do this too, you can rate a process on risk and inefficiency. In some processes, and I'll just pick subcontract admin compliance, we got a sub on the job with no insurance, or insurance is expired. That is a significant risk. That is not inefficient yet. It's just risk. And if that can happen easily, then the risk is high. We rate risk on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very high. If your billing process requires a download from job cost, manipulation in a spreadsheet, and then further processing and then posting back into the system, that would be a process that is inefficient, vastly inefficient. Maybe it's not risky because people are very good at their job and there's a lot of quality control built in to ensure check values. Then maybe the risk is low, but the inefficiency is high. Well, when you plot all of these processes on a graph like this, what's called a scatter plot, you end up with processes that exist in different quartiles. And if you have a process that is both very risky and inefficient, you're in the upper right, and that's a bad place to be. This gives you visibility into what are the processes in the business that should be fixed or needs attention, because that's not a good place to be. And then we add one more dimension on here, which is impact to the organization. There are functions in the organization that could be high risk, could be inefficient, but only impact a few people. So those tend to get, in our model here, smaller circles, and things that are high impact, like change order management, forecasting, purchase orders, get a bigger number, therefore a bigger circle. So that's what you're looking for. Things in the upper right with a big circle. Okay. Rush toward AI. There is, I mean, a lot of IT directors that we know are getting tremendous pressure from board and management, ELTs, to figure out AI. And we were with a fairly big contractor just last week, and there was a lot of pressure in the room to figure out what's the AI path look like. And there is, in fact, most software solutions today will promote, they have it on their website, AI enabled or AI powered. And some of that's true, some of it's hype, some of it's still early in its adoption. And I would say, I'll go out on a limb here and say that a lot of companies don't have their data in good enough condition to be AI ready, AI enabled. They're still working on their data and analytics. It's not yet predictive. We're not at that point yet, but it can be, and it's not that long of a journey. It's just some discipline. But while we're waiting for that to happen, I think there are some really good AI powered applications. Contract review comes to mind. Some people know about Document Crunch. Crow had it, the accounting consulting firm has another one that's very strong for that kind of document review. There are safety solutions that have a predictive component, scheduling optimization. N-Plan and Smart PM are a couple that actually will interrogate a schedule and look for optimization opportunities. AP processing for invoice routing and review, takeoff functions like toggle. So there are a number of point solutions that are trying to bring AI power into them. And I think some of those can be used effectively while the organization is maturing. Now, that being said, if you haven't started the discussion around policy and governance of AI, you probably should because it's going to be at your front door if it isn't already. And I don't think companies have given it enough thought. What are the risks? What are the opportunities? How do we manage it? How do we control? I mean, maybe you've heard of hallucination. And I don't mean the kind that you have in the evening if you've had too much to drink. It's hallucinations within data, and AI can hallucinate and give you bad direction. So um, we have to be sure at this point that we understand what it's doing and that it's doing it well and safely. So and there's also a concern over connecting up to large language models and other AI tools that are actually consuming some of your data. And then your data can be put out there in the public domain. It will be anonymized, but it's still out there. And I think some contractors have felt like that's a bit too intrusive. Um, this is a quick gauge of where we think AI is in terms of its readiness in the industry and its impact on potential impact. We could probably debate where some of the positions are here, and it's also something that I think is evolving quite a bit, but it's a gauge for what's out there that's mature enough to start looking at and implementing, what's maybe worth monitoring but not ready, and then what's the what where are we going to get value. I would also say don't bite off more than you can chew. Take on one, two of these initiatives at a time. Okay, one last thing, and then I think I'll move us into questions a little bit. And I thought of this recently because I had a program I was delivering for an association relative to job cost. And job cost is something that we have, and this is in the vein of data analytics and AI. Um, our job cost systems today do a brilliant job of job cost. They give us budget, actual change orders, forecasted cost, productivity sometimes, but it's always reporting what's happened. That's what it does. And that's not a bad thing, but we spend an awful lot of energy looking back at what happened. And there's really no correlation to anything outside of that. And when you look at it this way, and I put this diagram together to talk to you a little bit about metadata and the value of having metadata on these projects. So if you look at your jobs and you look at job cost, you're going to get cost versus budget, actual, forecasted, historical margin, erosion. You'll get all of that, but you don't have anything to put context around it. What was the contract type? Who was the owner? What was the condition of the drawings and design? Who was the architect? Um, um, were there a lot of RFIs? Were there a lot of change orders? Did we buy the job well and quickly, or were we late in procurement? Was our labor productivity good? Did we staff the job the way we thought we would and planned to? Were we late in the schedule? So there's a lot of metadata that exists in your organization relating to jobs, but as from a data standpoint, it's not together. And so I think that when you look at data warehouse and analytics, we've got to move to a position of being able to tie all of this, what you could call predictive data, into the job cost record. Um, so just something I'm still working on theory wise, but it came to me recently, I would say that we don't do this important step. Um, Last point, and then I'll open it up for questions. We're definitely seeing a lot more business analysts in contractor organizations. And this is, I mean, we've got a client, 60 million in revenue, specialty contractor, and they hired a data analyst. Couldn't have been happier. They weren't very mature from an IT and systems perspective, so the data analyst had a lot of work to do. But too many times we try and take on these new initiatives with IT and process change, and we don't have any personnel to actually help get the work done. So, um, a business analyst role is a much younger version of me in the organization who can talk about process and systems and change management, and highly valuable. Directors of innovation are new, and I would say mainly in bigger companies, but somebody whose whole job is nothing but looking at the company's processes and technology and figuring out what are the new developments that we should be taking advantage of. Bigger organizations have a data engineer, that name is as it implies, and we are seeing the role of CIO come down. So it used to be that only massive companies had a CIO, and now I would say mid-tier firms are starting to get CIOs and IT directors, and that is a strategic function. This is not somebody that came out of the data center and knows how to, wire a network. It is somebody that can think strategically and work with vendor management, security, and such. So good changes, I would say, in the industry. Okay, so I'm going to open it up for some questions and let Tamana share what we've got.
Sure. Well, thank you everybody for listening in. We'll wait for some questions. Christian, one of the questions that we're going to ask you is, you mentioned those four positions in construction organization as it relates to IT. Which one would you say is the most important and why?
Good one. So um, I would say that it's a tie. So you have to have an IT director that's properly positioned. And I've seen way too many organizations who have a lower level IT individual who's very capable of keeping the lights on and keeping firewalls up and all of that, but they're not strategic and they don't have a seat at the management table. So getting the right level of IT management that's now strategic is vital. And oddly enough, the business analyst is pretty important too, because in some organizations, you almost can't get anything done without having that business analyst available to work with vendors, work with the user community, work with IT, and craft the processes and train and get things deployed. So I would say those are the tie for the top.
Great. Thank you. I know we're at a couple minutes left. One other question for you would be, your presentation represents a lot of like tech and advancement opportunities and initiatives. How do you go about getting funding and resources to get all of this done?
Okay, and then there's also, I see a question here about data quality, so let's get back to that one too. But yes, funding. This is an amazing question and challenge. Um, I have noticed that, and I've worked with, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 firms in the last year that are $1 billion in revenues, but they act and behave like $200 million a year. So their tech stacks are immature. They don't spend enough on IT. And what happens is they go from 200 million to a billion kind of fast, and their IT maturity does not move with them, and their IT spend behavior doesn't move with. And so I think that's part of why I like this IT director, CIO position, because their job is to help make the case for the IT spend that is necessary. I also think that contractors they're very capable of spending $1 million on a piece of heavy equipment because they know exactly what the return is and how to calculate the return. But when it comes to things like middleware and data and new platforms and all that, they don't know. And they wonder we've got all this technology. I don't know that I feel like we're better off as a business. So you put the pressure back on the people that are asking for stuff and say, you know what? Don't come to me with a new tool. Come to me with a proper proposal that shows me the business case, the ROI, the demands for both money and people, what the risks are, and then I'll take a look at it and consider it. So I think you have to be pretty structured, pretty deliberate about that ask.
Great. And then I think we have one question in here about what would you recommend as first steps to improving data quality?
Well, I think that if you go back to the diagram I had about a business process, and I'll even bring that up on the screen here real quick, because I think that's a very good and proper question. So if you go back to this one, so I would start by looking inside of your current systems and looking at the condition of the data. Do we have vendors that are no longer in business? Do we have duplicates and triplicates of customer records or vendor records? Do we have missing data? Like just do a query and extract and filter and kind of put Power BI or Tableau on top of some of this and just do rudimentary graphs. And you're going to see pretty easily whether or not you have data quality issues. Then I think the question is kind of root cause. What caused us to have that? Do we not have good protocols and processes around vendor setup? Or can anybody set up a new vendor? That's how you end up with 5, 6, 10 different vendors of the same company. So look at the existing data and examine the process itself. Okay, we're at time. I was
Yes.
thrilled to see so many folks on that I know and enjoy working with, and hopefully you found a few points in here that were useful to you. And wish you the best for the rest of the day. Thank you.